So once again, we're taking a deep breath in. Oh, just rooting, grounding ourselves in the here and now, breathing in that peace, exhaling that joy. And once more into this beautiful transition. And so for those of you who's joining us in person or for those joining us at home, we have this little handout, which I'll put a link to down below. We've covered 3 tenets of living peace these past 2 months. Mastery of thought, mastery of impulse, mastery of emotion, and before that, we actually covered the 3 aspects of ego. And so it's been a really joyous time, really getting into the meat and taters of things. But I really wanted to take a pause before we move on to the next 3, simply because for the past however many years I've been doing this, quite a handful, it's interesting because I always teach folks, starting with a 5-minute morning meditation, or even 5 minutes before noon, or even if you could just whip 5 minutes in anytime during the day, that's fine. But it's funny that what happens is that we kind of just stay at that place of 5 minutes. We really don't expand the practice. And so I wanted to actually come up with a Dunisha daily practice that involves many things that you can work towards. So you start with the 5 minutes, you work up towards 20 in the morning, then you have 5 minutes a night, you work towards 20 in the evening, and then in between during the day, what are just some mindfulness activities that you can do that if you do them, they will certainly help cultivate a greater mindfulness, greater pause, even greater patience, and the ability to respond throughout the day. And so I think this will actually end up becoming like a mini book just for folks that they can use as a practical guide on what to do on a regular basis. Because an issue that a lot of a lot of people like me face when we're teaching this stuff is it's very easy to just get lost in theory and get lost in philosophy. And if you've listened to me, or maybe you've listened to other spiritual teachers or pastors or anyone in between, a lot of times it's up here. It's all about the branches. It's about spiritual effort and these fun ideas. Or if you're in the spiritual new age circles, you might get lost sometimes falling in line with the spiritual highs, where you chase from one spiritual high to the next spiritual high or the next spiritual high. Or even in it could be traditional or new age counseling type things where you're chasing that self-help, where it's just like, I read this book, now I read this book, now I read this book, or I have this session, I have this session, I have this session. And so we're just always going from thing to thing to thing to thing, and we never really develop full, deep roots. And your roots are your practice. And so I thought that this would just be a simple, it's simple, but it's not necessarily easy to do. Let me disclaim that. But it's something that we can maybe all work towards together as a community. And whether you're just doing 2 minutes in the morning, that's okay. Or if you forget certain days, that's okay. There's absolutely no judgment, because what happens sometimes is you are shared a practice, and then if you don't do the full practice, guilt creeps in. Who's done that before? Where you're just like, man, I should have meditated today. And then already you just have that should have, and should have is a judgment. And then you're shitting on yourself. And it's the spiral goes. So it's like, here's this practice that's meant to, help bring a little bit of peace, but all of a sudden with you not doing it, or maybe you're not doing it to where you think you're doing it in a way that's like most effective, where you're comparing yourself to someone else's practice, all of a sudden your little ball of peace, your snowball of peace, now turns into a snowball of guilt, and then pain and suffering. And so it's going down the opposite side of the hill. And so it's funny how, and this is why places like this are fantastic to exist, or having teachers, simply because they can kind of like nip that little ego in the butt when they start to see that it's occurring. When you come together in a weekly format, or you come together one-on-one with a teacher that can kind of be aware of your journey, it nips those little moments where your mind starts to go this way instead of this way, and you really get caught up in the judgment, and you may even feel like the judgment that you're having is rectified or dignified, that you're supposed to be doing this. And so you beat yourself up, because when you beat yourself up, you're having motivation. Think about that for a moment. I had this conversation recently with someone. Inspiration wells up from within, while motivation often stems from negative, quote, negative situations, to where you motivate yourself out of frustration, you motivate yourself out of guilt, you motivate yourself in action out of, if you really pay attention, anytime you felt really motivated in life, you're going to notice that it often stems from a little bit of ego. It often stems from a lot of bit of ego. It often stems from some separating force. It was funny, I saw this comic last night, actually. It was this person, you know, just a regular comic person doing some rock climbing, and then everyone's like, you can do it. And then the person's like, I don't know. No, you can do it. All these like 3 or 5 people down below shouting, you can do it. And then there's this one person just like, pan face, you can't do it, you're gonna fail. And then all of a sudden the person's like, rah, and they run to the they like just rip themselves up to the top, and they get the first place trophy. And then in the last comic, they're whacking the other person that said you can't do it in the face with the trophy. Woo! It really took a turn there. But think about that for a moment, where all the positive reinforcement wasn't really helping the person's self-doubt, but then they were motivated by wanting to prove the other person wrong. Interesting. Have you ever noticed that when people do give you positive reinforcement, you'll often disagree with them in your head? They're like, you are such a beautiful person. You're like, no, I'm not. You're such an intelligent person. No, I'm not. You can do anything. No, I can't. And so it's funny how we actually disagree with the positive stuff from other individuals, but we often use the negative motivation to propel us along. Maybe yes, maybe no. This can be a generalization, but it's very fascinating how that occurs. And that's why what I recognize is, on one hand, it's really important for us to let go of that negative motivation in one aspect. It can definitely serve us from time to time, but you're going to notice that it often is just jumping from one thing to the next thing to the next thing, and you may never have that full inner peace that we're looking for. But also, there's the other flip side of it, is all the positive reinforcement we can give you will never actually help you until you actually agree with it within your own mind. Think about that for a moment. Write that down. This is a hot damn nugget. Hot damn nugget. Any positive reinforcement or compliments you're getting from other people will never actually help you. And so think of you who are function off of validation. It helps a little bit, but does it ever make that feeling go away? Because sure, you may have that validation one day and you're just like, you know what, I did do good, thank you. But then it comes back, doesn't it? And then you need that validation again. And then you get it, maybe. And then you feel better for a while, and then it goes away. And then it just becomes this repeated cycle, forever grasping. And this is one of the aspects of ego, forever grasping for some external validation, for grasping for some external sense of peace, external sense of love, external sense of ... It doesn't matter what it is, but it's always impermanent. It's always temporary. And that's kind of the aspect of where sometimes in Buddhism, you'll hear where it's like, it's a half-truth, where it's like life is suffering. A lot of times you'll hear that. And it almost sounds negative. But in actuality, it's not negative, because it's kind of just like a doctor saying, hey, you have this wound here. And it's not a bad or negative thing that you have this wound. It's just, now that you know that you have this wound, now you can address it and heal it. But when you recognize that life often has that suffering component, or rather maybe a more effective word would say life has that stressful component, and that every day it's likely that you may feel some stress. And when you recognize that that's there and that it's okay, and then you can recognize where it comes from, which Buddha gave a fantastic whole religion or philosophy, however you want to look at it, as to where suffering comes from. And a lot of it stems from our attachment to things that are impermanent. Write that down. My suffering, my pain, my stress often stems from my attachment to things that are impermanent. My suffering or my stress often stems from my attachment to things that are impermanent. Crazy, isn't it? So when you point it out, all of a sudden you're like, oh, this makes sense. And then when we point it out, maybe you've heard this 1,000 times before, but we still do it, don't we? Even I do it from time to time. Anytime I notice I'm a bit stressed or a bit anxious, I just have to look at where my mind's going. And it's attaching to some opinion, to some idea, to something that I want to look a certain way. Like I love Angel. Because every single morning when she starts this in any of our events, even when I'm doing one-on-ones, there'll be like a 5-minute odd period. And I have this big attachment to wanting to be professional and to appear professional. And so when she's going to town, on that door, all of a sudden there's that part of my ego that says, this isn't okay. Oh my gosh. So one, maybe I'm afraid of the judgment from the other person, or really more than anything, I'm judging myself and how I'm appearing, how I'm placing myself forward. Because as someone who's always prided himself in we're casual, but we're also very structured. And I like my damn structure. And when something throws a wrench into it, and so it's very fascinating how even with that can be a source of suffering for me if I attach to it. But instead, I breathe, I let it go. I breathe, I let it go. I know that it's impermanent and that it's okay. And it's just a natural part of life, because life is messy, isn't it? When we recognize that, we can heal it so much quicker. Deep breath. So that's my long intro that I didn't plan on giving. Back to this. But they come out and they're joyous and delicious and juicy. So I'm going to go ahead and just run through this. You're welcome to follow along. And then again, for those watching at home, I will have a link to it in the bottom of the section of YouTube. So yeah, 5 to 20-minute morning meditation. 5 to 20-minute morning meditation. Fantastic to do for 5 minutes, but ideally you want to start working towards 20. And the greatest importance of meditation is that it fosters discipline of body and mind for an increasing peace. A lot of people think that meditation is just like this still-mindedness, and that's where I like to call bullshit. If you actually listen to Zen masters, they actually point out that you really can't ever stop your mind, so stop trying. And that's just kind of like how here in the West we get these teachings, and then we kind of just like misinterpret them. And then we spread all this information, because I can't tell you how many people I've met where they're just like, well, I can't meditate, I can't still my mind. And then I'll share with them, well, aren't you in luck? That's not meditation. Sure, after 20 to 40 years of meditating, maybe your mind becomes very still, but it never stops working. There's always something going on. In actuality, what we teach for the first 5 minutes is to sit your ass down and just be there for 5 minutes. And just develop that self-discipline of sitting still for 5 minutes, because you're having a physical practice there. And you might get really bored, and that's delicious. Especially if you up it to 20 minutes. Boredom, some Zen masters say boredom is the entry to enlightenment. Because all of a sudden you get bored, and then you actually start to recognize in that silence, after you're doing it for a consistent enough period of time, consecutive days, you start to recognize really the box of crazy. Because when you're going from thing to thing to thing, from day to day to day, and you're just constantly full of activity, you're not really going to be able to pinpoint or recognize your box of crazy. This part of ourselves that's full of neurosis, that's reacting. And so when you sit down for 5 minutes, all of a sudden, you're slowly developing a practice of creating a separation between yourself, your perceived self, and then what we might say is your higher self. The observer behind the mind, the observer behind the body. And so I just love this practice. There's this, let me see if I can remember this story. Let's take a breath. It's a pretty good metaphoric story, but there was this man who could never meditate his entire life, and he always had trouble sleeping at night, major insomnia. And so one time he went to the Zen retreat, and then they locked him into a little hermitage, which is just like a little hut. There's really nothing in it. And then he's just like, you can come out once you like get through the night and meditate and all that stuff, and you'll develop sleep, whatever. Anyway, he's in there trying to meditate. It's not working, all these things. And it's just, he can't focus. All of his thoughts and memories through his whole life are flashing before his eyes, all these things he wants to do, and then he's judging himself. This is a stupid activity. How did I pay for this? I'm literally paying to be in an empty room through the night. And anyway, a snake comes in. It's a poisonous snake. And so he sees it there in the corner, and he freaks out. But he recognizes that if he moves too much, it's going to lash out. So he just sits still and stares at the snake through the entire night because he's so afraid to get bitten and die because no one's around to help him. So there he is, just like so focused, so still, looking at the snake through the entire night. Well, he gets eventually exhausted enough and then falls asleep. And then he wakes up and he recognizes that's the first night's sleep he's ever had. And he slept so peacefully, so soundly because he exhausted himself so much. And he's so focused. And when he woke up in the morning, the snake was gone. And it was fascinating that he woke up with a clear mind. And when I say clear mind, I'm not saying a mind without any thoughts. I'm just saying a mind that is present. That's looking. When you look around you, you're just seeing what's around you and not your interpretation of it. When you look around you, you're looking at things as they are rather than having the past flood your mind or the future flood your mind. Well, the story doesn't say if the snake was real or not, because it might have just been a hallucination. But what's fascinating is that because it was life and death situation, it's mind, he actually sits still for the first time in his life to look and focus on the snake. And so meditation can be that focus point. Have you ever used a candle flame? You can use that as a meditative exercise. Have you ever went into nature and watched a stream? You can use that as a meditation. And so this ability to sit still and be focused without needing to get up to go over here, without needing to get over here, without losing your concentration, that is a superpower. Crazy, isn't it? So I just love that little story because it is fascinating how when we finally surrender, because he was so exhausted, he finally just surrendered over, and then the ego quieted down. So that story is this huge, the main moral of the story is surrendering over. Think about that for a moment. Take a breath. And it's fascinating that if you actually surrender for sitting still for 20 minutes every single day, it's a lot easier than if in your whole mind you're saying, I don't want to be doing this, I don't want to be doing this, I don't want to be doing this, I don't want to be doing this. This is boring, fuck you, Alaric, fuck you, Alaric, fuck you, Alaric. Does that make sense? Have you ever done something you didn't want to do and you had a terrible time? Have you ever done something that you didn't want to do, but you then surrendered to it and you had an okay time or even a pretty good time? It's all ego. And so these 5 to 20 minutes help rectify that, help create that pause to help bring you into control of your mind and recognize that, am I going in this direction or am I going in that direction? So I will share a little bit more after that when we get to the end meditation. So after you do your morning meditation, you're going to then be moving on to presence with work. And this may, even if you work from home, or maybe if you're a mom or a father, stay-at-home dad, or stay-at-home mom, or whatever the hell you're doing, even if you're unemployed and not doing much in the day, and you're just enjoying your time, enjoy your time with presence, damn it, rather than feeling that whole guilt, or rather than letting your mind be consumed by things. And so presence with work can be, if you're not working, it could be just presence with whatever activity you're doing during the day. Does that make sense? Rather than getting lost in a million things that you think you should be doing, or you having this list of things and you're not present. And so I like to define presence as whatever you're doing, be fully alive and attentive with it. Whatever you're doing, be fully alive and attentive with it. Wash those dishes. Wash those dishes. Do not wash your worries. Actually, it'd be okay to wash your worries. Not on you, though. And then you have a lunch, right? Most of us eat lunch. And so I love this. Eat your food and not your worries, stress, or anticipations. Eat your food and not your stress, worries, or anticipations. Who actually eats mindfully? Yeah, you might eat mindfully in the sense that you eat things that are healthy, but who actually eats mindfully to where when you're eating your food, you're only eating your food, right? Honestly, I do not do this effectively. Like if I cook in there, I'm just like, let's pull up an interesting YouTube video. I'm going to learn something while I'm eating. If you go to more of a traditional Buddhist retreat, you may be forced to chew each of your bites. I don't know if it's like 30 or something times before you swallow. Welcome to Mindful Nation. And then you go on to pause between work and home. Maybe you resume your work, but then there's this moment. I've been teaching this to a lot of people lately. The pause between coming home from work and entering that door with your family. So important to make that distinction. Even if you work from home, it's important to create that distinction where you're like, okay, work mode, family mode. Because how often does it spill over? Andrew and I do this so often where it's really important for us. Anytime he comes home, I really try to be very mindful with him or present, or maybe give him a little bit of time, then we resume. We would do this back in Arizona. He'd come home from after seeing 150 people, 120, 150 kids as a middle school teacher. And then he'd have be in rush hour traffic. He'd get home. At first, right when we moved in together, I would jump on him. I'm like, I'm so excited to see you. Let's talk. And I could just see his like energy, like, oh God, too much stimulation. And so I recognized that. I'm like, okay, this is not working out. Let us go ahead. You do you for 40 minutes. Take your shower, get some coffee, eat some food, whatever it is you want to do. And then after you have that unwind time, then we'll connect. Let's create that pause between work life and home life. And guess what? It really helps. And it helps strengthen the relationship, strengthen the marriage. Even if this is friends, even if you're in with a roommate, it doesn't matter what it is or what relationship it is, this can strengthen because you're not letting one thing spill into the other. In that instance, I was more the one jumping on him. But often what happens is maybe the person coming home from work had a very stressful day and then they were on top of their loved ones or their family. And do you really want to bring the stress of the workday into the home? And then you'll say, here's the excuse. Well, I had a stressful day. And that means I had a stressful work day. Therefore, it equates to I have a whole stress day. But that's not true because work is work. And then when you come home, you can create that distinction and have a beautiful evening. But a lot of people don't have that distinction. And so the stress of the work spills over into stress of the home. Arguments may ensue. You're not feeling heard. You need to stop nagging me, all these things. Why do you need so much attention? Maybe even to your animals. I don't know. Some people, I'm not going to go on that rant. Animals generally help release stress. But boy, howdy, did I raise goats and they can be hell. Anyway, a little side tangent there. Bless their sweet souls. Does this make sense? Please, please, please create some pause. Please, please, please create some distinction. And this next one, 30 minutes of study or reflection. Visit your studies daily for the time of reactivation of their wisdoms. If we don't visit the studies or the exercises on a daily practice, it's as if they never even existed in your mind, because only the present moment contains life. Think of how much we've learned throughout our entire life. Really think about that. All the experiences you've had, every course you've taken, all your studies, high school, maybe some college, maybe some work prep, whatever it is, all these things you learned, even just being a partner, being a mother, being a father, being a daughter, it doesn't matter what it is. Think of all these things you've learned. And most days, 99.99999% of it doesn't exist. And whatever exists is what you focus on. And a lot of times what we focus on is whatever's stressful, whatever's triggering us. That's what exists. And so a lot of times we say, well, I took his course and I got this robe. I'm enlightened. No. Unless you're doing the practices daily. Even if you don't have the robe and you're doing the practices daily, you're still further along in your own peace practice than anyone else that may have a doctorate's degree in it that's not doing it daily. Think about someone who went to school and became like this amazing chef, but they never cooked themselves a single meal or cook anyone else a meal. Does that education matter in that moment? No, it doesn't even exist until you actually activate it on the daily. Hashtag activate it on the daily. Write that down. Activate it on the daily. And honestly, it doesn't have to be super involved. It can literally be this. Sometimes I'll do this. I'll just read 1 or 2 lines or a paragraph and I'll take a bath and I'll just let it marinate. Or I like to watch a lot of monk videos on YouTube. And then I'll just absorb that. And sometimes they're silent and I'll just absorb the silence because there's wisdom there. But it's activating it on a daily basis. Makes sense? versus activating your stresses or the things that are going left instead of right for you on a daily basis. Because again, an unchecked mind often goes towards the negative. And again, negative isn't bad or wrong. For me, I define negative as just separating forces, force of this energy that just does not help your peace. Make sense? And then we conclude our day with 5 to 20 minutes of an evening meditation. And this can actually maybe be combined with your 30 minutes of study and reflection. You bring them together. Because who's meditated before you go to sleep, you'll notice that you sleep a little bit better. Maybe not always, but generally, if you calm your mind, if you get into that state, rather than maybe watching something right before sleep, or if you're having this really intense intellectual thing before sleep, it could be anything. Everyone's different. I really can't speak on this. But at least from what I've heard from many students over the years, when they do meditate before going to bed, or they have a little bit of a ritual, or as I like to say, you exist by candlelight, you will notice a difference because you're shifting your, which one is rest and digest? Is that parasympathetic? Okay. You're shifting yourself from sympathetic mode to parasympathetic mode. The fight or flight, the adrenaline, into the peace and relaxation, which then allows the body to heal that much more effectively. Crazy, isn't it? Anyone ever feel adrenaline before? It like stops your digestion. You're just like, ah, and you feel that knot. Everything just starts to slow down. While when you relax, the flow returns. And being able to enter into the night and into your sleep time, that really greatly helps. Interesting, isn't it? Cool. So we have our meditations, we have our presence, we have the pauses, we have the eating, and we have the study. I love the pauses because they create space between activities so that they do not spill into others. This will be literally anything. When you leave this place today, when you walk out that door and you get in your car, take a breath, take a pause. It's now time to drive. Don't be, please think about this for the rest of the day. No. Think about driving and only driving. But isn't that interesting that instantly, even this stuff can be in your mind 24/7, but it can be in your mind 24/7, but have it in your mind 24/7 in a way that you're present with whatever you're doing, rather than chewing on the theory. Make sense? Creating that pause, deep breath. Let me see. Anyone have the time? What time do we got? I want to see how much. 2 o'clock. Perfect. Okay. So, yes, now. The time is now. So, back down below that you're going to find that we have the daily practices, which is the first 3 practices of living peace. So we've kind of covered these in the past, but I just want to do a quick review. So the first one is file exchange. Consciously choose and redirect your thoughts. And the question I like to ask is, am I allowing ego-driven thoughts to guide me, or self-chosen strengthening thoughts of whatever? You could put of peace, of gratitude, of harmony. But let me define that. Am I allowing ego-driven thoughts to guide me, or self-chosen reinforcing thoughts, still self-chosen strengthening thoughts? Ego-driven thoughts are just thoughts that are creating separation. Not bad, not wrong, but you can feel if you're having an ego thought because it doesn't feel great. You're getting that little stress feeling, that little stress ball, that anxiety. Pay attention to your thoughts. Something is magnifying it. Your thoughts are a growth formula for your feelings and emotions. Wherever your thoughts grow, something is going to magnify. And so the file exchange practice, which you can read in Living Peace, is a great formula for shifting and redirecting your conscious and subconscious thoughts, allowing you to actually develop a consistent peace in your life. And then we have PPR, pause, process, and respond to every interaction and stimulation. Am I peacefully and confidently responding to life, or am I reacting on impulse and imbalance? Who has reacted and spoken to someone when it comes from a place of emotions? And how well did that work out for you? It often leads to more stress. It often leads to more conflict, more friction. Sure, you may eventually get through it and return to peace, and then you have like this great hugging and makeup moment, and that's fantastic. But you could have gotten there without this whole in-between period. And what's beautiful is that what we learn here allows us to skip that gap period. Or let me reframe. We always have that gap period, and it's really uncomfortable, but you learn not to react when you're in it. And when you don't react in it, you develop less momentum in that, quote, negative direction of emotion. And so when I recognize I'm in the gap, anyone, who's ever been in that limbo period where you're waiting to talk to someone, or you're waiting to hear back about like even a job interview, or you go on that first date and you're just like, do they like me? And you're waiting to check the phone. It could be anything. It could be something simple or small or large, or it could even be waiting for someone to hear results with the hospital visit. That gap period of great anxiety, stress, or grief. Well, when we fully practice these teachings, we breathe through it. And rather than reacting and assuming the worst, or maybe even assuming the best, both are illusions, we just remain neutral and we say, I'm going to refrain from all assumptive thinking until I have the full facts here. That is one of the most difficult things to do, to let go of speculation and just wait until you have the full information. But I'll tell you what, it's possible. That's something I've been really working on these past 6 months. And anytime I want to develop an opinion or an assumption about something, I literally have to tell myself, let's just breathe and focus on the present moment, because any speculation is probably going to be inaccurate because you don't know until you know. Make sense? Think of how much time you'll save. Goodness. And then we have the emotional wave surfing. Acknowledge the impermanence of emotions. Am I being consumed by my emotions or mindfully flowing through them? Am I being consumed by my emotions or mindfully flowing through them? Take it from someone who was an emotional wreck for most of his life. This guy. I am what you call an empath. I feel everything and anything at all times. And now it may not seem like I am, but especially as a child, if Feather would touch me, I'd cry. Like, I had so many tears. My parents were just like, how can so many tears exist in one child? Bless their sweet souls. And so, yes, it's interesting because there was this moment in my life where it was just kind of like this flip of awareness to where I was always feeling everything. And I almost wore it as a badge of honor. Think about that for a moment. I am so sympathetic. I'm so compassionate. And so a lot of times our relating to other people and where we might get so emotional about other people's lives is ego reinforcement, where we're actually making it more about us. And so we actually use our sympathy as a badge of honor, even though it's making us an emotional blob. And then when we're emotional blob, we're actually less effective in being there for the other people. But when we remain neutral and we remain calm and we remain in our ability to hold space, what happens? We can show up more and we're less drained by it. Who's a giver? And who's been fucking drained by giving? Point and match. And so when you take that step back and you give without the full emotional involvement, because when you're fully emotionally involved, what happens? You have expectations. And guess what happens with those expectations? They often do not work in your favor. Can we relate? And so we learn to simply be that neutral, that healthy separation, that neutral discernment. And again, I'm not saying become robots and not have emotions. What I'm saying is that when you practice more peace with your emotions, you're going to actually start experiencing joy a lot more rather than grief. And again, shitty things are going to happen and you're going to go through the grieving processes, and that's always going to happen. It's a natural part of life. But you'll start to make a distinction that it's not about you in this moment. It's about the other person. And when you create that distinction, all of a sudden, the weight is a little bit more lifted and you can show up on a more regular basis. Think about that for a moment. Maybe add this question. Yeah, please add this down. Write this down. Am I making this about me? Am I making this about me? That is a powerful, powerful, powerful question. Woo! Hot damn, that's a hot damn nugget. I'm going to just ask myself of that every second of every day, because any situation you've ever been in, even like if you're at a grocery store and someone looks at you odd, all of a sudden you make it about you. You're like, well, they don't like me. No, that might just be, they may be even looking at, maybe they had a thought And then they accidentally looked at you at the same time, and it was not even about you, but you just made a story about it. Crazy, isn't it? Am I making this about me? And when you make it about you, you're going to have an emotional stimulation. You're going to have an emotional response. So we create that distinction. Deep breath. I could speak another hour on all of these, but I'll just leave you with that little bit of information nuggets. And that's what's difficult about this work, is that literally there's just so much of it. And almost everything I said today, I can almost give like a parallel alternate response that can give a moment to where it may not be effective to use. And so that's why it's hard, because a lot of the wisdom in Zen and living peace and all these things, they're paradoxes. They're not these cookie cutters that are for every situation. And so we have to learn to approach every situation as a unique situation and not get caught up in dogma. Because even this could be turned into dogma, where you say, well, I have to do this at all times, and this is the only way that it works. And then if you go so severe and strict in it, then you're actually going to be limiting yourself and restricting yourself. And so please take this with a stride, with easy strides, and recognize whether or not, is this a moment to fully activate this right now? Or can I give myself a little bit of a break right now? Because the last thing we want you to feel is guilt. The last thing we want to feel is that judgment. Does that make sense? At the end of the day, am I in judgment? Or at the end of the day, am I in acceptance? Let's take a breath. And as my favorite saying, I think Abraham Hicks said it, you will never finish and you can never get it wrong. You'll never finish and you can never get it wrong. And as Ami once said, she liked what I said, I don't give a shit what you do. I don't care about you.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite thing that Alaric says. He says, I don't give a shit about you. And I don't give a shit what you do. I don't care. Which is so beautiful, because in that moment, then I feel more comfortable to tell him everything that I do, because he doesn't care. There's not judgment, in that place. So I started bringing that into my practice. I say it a little differently.
Yes. A little different.
But it really opens that door so that, we're not here, right? We've got people, and I really appreciate that Alaric was able to do that. And it really, I think that it's beautiful. And we could do that for ourselves, we could do that for others.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Deep breath. Any concluding thoughts, my love?
I would just say with this, my own personal experience going through this is just trying to work with the power of habit. Because you might say, or I've said, well, if I have to do 5 minutes in the morning, then I have to wake up 5 minutes earlier, and then my ego gets mad at me. Or if I have to go to lunch and people are in the break room and I'm like, but I want to meditate by myself, and then I don't want to isolate myself. Or when I get home and I immediately want to jump out of the car and get in the house and everything. But just those things of, if I need to wake up 5 minutes earlier, I start doing it even if my ego's badgering me. And then it just becomes habit. And then I can sit down and at least be there. At lunch, I can just tell my coworkers, hey, I might not talk while I eat. And it's not because of you. It's just, I want to silently eat right now. And they might give me a weird look, but that's okay. And then when I get home from work, you might hear the car pull up, but if I stay an extra minute in the car and just either turn the car off or just wait and breathe for 1 minute, you won't know the difference, but I'll come in a lot calmer. Yeah. And so, but then not using that as an excuse to hide from your relatives by staying in the car for half an hour. But I had a family member who used to call and she'd be really quiet. She'd talk to my mom, and my mom would say, what are you doing? She's like, I'm in the car eating chocolate. She's like, we're on a diet. My husband can't know. And she's like, you should probably just tell him that you're breaking the fast there. So not using it as an excuse to hide, but just when you get home, just even for 1 minute, just breathe in your car and then come inside. But yeah, it's just communication, really, and forming habits. Yeah. And telling people, hey, if I'm quiet, this is why. Or if I'm going to stay in the car for a minute, this is why. Or, hey, I've noticed when I come home, this happens. How about we change it? Yep. Those little shifts, and then they become habits, and it's just more ingrained. And then some days they're still just going to throw you out of whack. But again, it's just accepting. Like, today's a weird one. I'm doing my practice, but it's still odd. So
yeah, we show up.
Yeah,
we show up.
Mm-hmm.
And the beautiful thing is, as I like to, with the quote, unconditional love is the outer expression of inner peace. Unconditional love is the outer expression of inner peace. We unattach, which allows us to develop our inner peace. But the beautiful thing is when we're unattached, we have an inner peace, we could show up more effectively than ever before for other people in the world and for ourselves. Deep breath. Thank you so much. So I'm going to shift gears and look at the camera for a second to conclude. And so I want to share with anyone who's watching after our service today, and thank you for joining in. Again, there's going to be the link down below with the information for the Dunisha Daily. And there'll also be a link down below if anyone would like to support our mission and our vision by donating. And we thank you in advance. Thank you, thank you, thank you, and blessings. Mwah.